Life and Explorations of David Livingston, Part 43. Chapter 29. The Animal Kingdom of Africa. Some account of the birds, beasts, reptiles, insects of Africa. The python of South Africa. No portion of the globe is so productive of wild animals as Africa. There, animal life is more extensive, if we may say, and more varied than anywhere else. The domestic animals of that continent are not to such extent different from those of other parts of the world as to merit special mention, with the exception of the camel, without whose aid a large portion of the country would not only be uninhabitable but untraversable. The invaluable services which this patient but obstinate beast of burden renders to the inhabitants of North Africa, are known to all men. In northern Africa and in the central portions, horses are numerous and many of them of excellent breeds. Here and in many parts of South Africa there are many cattle used as beasts of burden and for beef. Some of them are noted for the prodigious size of their horns. Sheep abound in some portions of the continent, but in South Africa the flocks are composed almost entirely of goats, which subsist better on the dry herbs of the desert, yield more milk, and are considered more palatable food. But in respect to wild beasts, all kinds of game, as the sportsman would say, Africa, as has been said by Dr. John Bonner, may be called the region of animal life, since there are more than twice the number of species in it that in the other quarters of the globe. Here are found, in immense numbers, all those kinds of animals which fill the strong cages of the menageries of Europe and Asia, America, of parks and zoological gardens, and many more besides. Here are the most abject and degraded specimens of mankind and the most sagacious and lordly wild animals. Here are the most beautiful and gentle of birds, and the most venomous and terrible serpents and reptiles. Here are small insects whose attacks are fatal to many useful animals, and others the devouring locusts which in a single day devastate vast sections of country. The lion, so long regarded as the king of beasts, is found in most parts of the interior of Africa. We have already seen that Dr. Livingston's opinions of this beast are very exalted. It is certainly inferior to the African leopard, both in beauty and courage. In strength and prowess, this latter animal is not inferior to the Asiatic tiger. The hippopotamus, supposed to be the behemoth of Job, is found in nearly all the rivers of Central and South Africa and the Nile. His body is often as large as that of a full-grown elephant. A noted African hunter killed one with a single ball, which was 6 feet broad across the belly. The skin of an adult hippopotamus, according to Duchalu, who shot several and stuffed one, is from 1.5 to 2 inches thick and exceedingly solid and tough, quite bulletproof in fact, except in a few thinner spots as behind the ear and near the eyes. It is devoid of hair, with the exception of a few short bristly hairs at the tail and a few scattered tufts near the muzzle. The color of the skin is a clay yellow, assuming a rosella hue under the belly. After death, the animal becomes a dull brownish color. It is successfully hunted by the natives of East Equatorial Africa, who approach within a few feet of it and fire their slugs at his eye and then run for dear life. For if the animal be not killed, the hunter surely will be. Coming, the most successful of American Nimrods, once slew some 10 hippopotami in the course of a couple of days and secured the carcasses of them, most of them, dragging them with oxen to which were attached strong cables fastened to the beasts. The bagging of several tons of edible game, the meat of the beast is described by some as like beef, by others as like pork, in a day or two could not be accomplished elsewhere than in Africa. Most of the perennial rivers and even small streams of a few feet depth abound in crocodiles. Those of South Africa, whose nature and habits are described by Dr. Livingston and Cumming, are a different species from the crocodile of the Nile, one of the sacred animals of the Egyptians. They are as great in size, however, and perhaps greater in ferocity. Their great numbers, particularly in the waters of equatorial Africa, are astonishing. The natives hunt them going in canoes and using a sharp harpoon with which the stout armor, elsewhere impenetrable, of the animal is pierced behind the legs. The natives are fond of the flesh. Though a full-grown crocodile will weigh as much as an ox, there is not much flesh that is edible. Cumming shot one more than 20 feet in length in a stream not more than 12 feet wide on our return to Damagandai's town, says Dr. Chaliu. As we were paddling along, I perceived in the distance ahead a beautiful deer looking meditatively into the waters of the lagoon, of which from time to time it took a drink. I stood up to get a shot, and we approached with the utmost silence, but just as I raised my gun to fire, a crocodile leaped out of the water and, like a flash, drove back in again with the struggling animal in its powerful jaws. So quickly did the beast take his prey that though I fired at him, I was too late. I would not have believed that this huge and unwieldy animal could move with such velocity. But the natives told me that the deer often falls prey to the crocodile. Sometimes he even catches the leopard. But then there is a harder battle than a poor little deer could make. The rhinoceros, formerly found on the slopes of Table Mountain, has now been driven far into the interior of South Africa. But here, these huge animals, second only to the elephant and hippopotamus in bulk, are found along all the streams and in the neighborhood of fountains and pools of water. Dr. A. Smith, in his Zoology of South Africa, makes 3 species of rhinoceros. The great hunter, Cumming, describes what he considers as 4 different kinds. Dr. Livingston, however, asserts that there are but 2 species, the white and the black, insisting that all the species made by naturalists beyond these 2 are based on mere differences in age, size, and direction of horn, all which vary much in their variety. The rhinoceros has a guardian spirit in the rhinoceros bird, his constant companion and devoted friend. Those of the black species are very wary, fierce, and difficult to take. Their flesh is tough, and also, while that of the white rhinoceros is fat, tender, and to the South African tribes delicious, he is of a comparatively gentle spirit also, and more easily found and dispatched. But the most interesting of the wild animals of Africa is the elephant, which as is well known, is in several respects different from the elephant of Asia. His ears are larger, and the formation of his tough, elastic feet is very different. His tusks also are larger, and he reaches a greater size than the Asiatic elephant. He has been found in nearly all parts of interior Africa, which have been explored, and to this day may be seen from vessels sailing along the west coast near the equator. as he comes down to the sea to bathe his ponderous body. These animals are found in troops, varying in number from a few to several hundred. At times, different troops have been found seen together, whose heavy tread in escaping would make the earth tremble. They are exceedingly delicate as to their food, of which, however, they require immense quantities. Docile by nature, they are wonderfully fearful of man, whom, with a favorable wind, they can scent at a great distance, but in defense of their young, or when attacked, they fight with the greatest courage and effect. The elephant is unquestionably recognized by all animals of the forest and as their undoubted master. They often retain life long after being mortally wounded, and when about to die, the agony of the dissolution of such an immense physical system forces tears from their eyes. But they expire without convulsions and in heroic silence. It might almost appear that their predominating feeling is that of sorrow that the vast forests through which they have roamed for years, perhaps a century, shall know them no more. It is difficult to believe one can kill these sublime animals for gain alone, unless he be at bottom a genuine scoundrel. It is doubtless different, however, when the gratification of the sporting propensity is the impelling motive. It was this which carried the Scottish hunter Rowley Gordon Cumming into the interior of South Africa only about 2 years after the arrival there of Dr. Livingston, and where he remained hunting elephants, rhinos, lions, hippopotami, camel leopards, and other great game for the period of nearly 5 years. Mr. Cumming's adventures in South Africa were published in my memory, it does not err, in the year 1850. If my memory does not err, in the year 1850. They were speedily republished in America and were at first received with no little incredulity, as, by the way, most accounts of adventures in Africa, from Mungo Park to Stanley, have been. Adventures there appear to be naturally incredible to the rest of the world. It is as it, with respect to the rebuilding of Chicago, no one believes it all until he sees it all, and after that he can believe almost anything is within the power of man's spirit of enterprise once fully aroused. The incredulity in regard to Mr. Cumming's wonderful success in securing great game in Africa has long since passed away, and his narrative is now regarded as altogether trustworthy. He remained in Africa hunting the greater part of 5 years. During this time he slew more than 100 elephants, besides those mortally wounded which escaped. He was equally successful with the camel leopard, rhinoceros, hippopotamus, lion, buffalo, eland, and the great variety of antelope which live in South Africa in countless numbers. One of the first adventures with large animals was with a troop of camel leopards. It is also thus graphically described. We halted beside a great glorious fountain, the name of which was Masoi, but I at once christened it the Elephant's Own Fountain. This was a very remarkable spot on the southern border of endless elephant forests, at which I had at length arrived. The foundation was deep and strong, situated in a hollow at the eastern extremity of this extensive valley, and its margin was surrounded by a level stratum of solid old red sandstone. Here and there lay a thick layer of soil upon the rock, and this was packed flat with the fresh spoor of elephants. Around the water's edge, the very rock was worn down by the gigantic feet which for ages had trodden there. We drew up the wagons on a hillock on the eastern side of the water. I had just cooked my breakfast and commenced to feed when I heard my men exclaim something in African, I think. And raising my eyes from my sesame stew, I beheld a truly beautiful and very unusual scene. From the margin of the fountain, there extended an open, level valley without a tree or bush that stretched away about a mile to the northward, where it was bounded by extensive groves of wide spreading mimosas. Up the middle of this valley stalked a troop of 10 colossal giraffes, flanked by two large herds of wildebeest, zebra with an advanced guard of pallas. They were all coming to the fountain to drink, and would be within rifle shot of the wagons before I could finish my breakfast. I, however, continued to swallow my food with the uttermost expedition, having directed my men to catch the saddle Colesberg, in which in a few minutes the giraffes were slowly advancing within 200 yards, stretching their graceful necks and gazing in wonder at the unwonted wagons. Grasping my rifle, I now mounted Colesberg and rode toward them. They continued gazing at the wagons until I was within 100 yards of them, when, whisking their long tails over their humps, they made off at the easy center. As I pressed upon them, they increased their pace, but Colesberg had much the speed of them, and before we had proceeded half a mile, I was riding by the shoulder of a dark chestnut old bull, whose head towered high above the rest. Letting fly at the gallop, I wounded him behind the shoulder, soon after which I broke him from the herd, and presently going ahead of him, I came to a stand. I gave him a second bullet somewhere near the first. These two shots had taken effect, and he was now in my power. But I would not lay him low so far from camp, so having waited until he had regained his breath, I drove him halfway back toward the wagons. Here he became obstroperious, so loading up one barrel and pointing my rifle toward the clouds, I shot him in the throat. When, rearing high, he fell backward and expired. This was a magnificent specimen of the giraffe, measuring upward of 18 feet high. I stood for nearly half an hour engrossed in the contemplation of his extreme beauty and gigantic proportions, and if there had been no elephants, I could have exclaimed, like Duke Alexander of Gordon, when he killed the famous old stag with 17 kine. Now I can die happy, but I longed for an encounter with the noble elephants, and I thought little more of the giraffe than if I had killed a gemsbok or an eland. And in another place he describes his second success with the camel leopard. We now bent our steps homeward. We had not ridden many miles when we observed a herd of 15 camel leopards browsing quietly in the open glade of the forest. After a very severe chase, in the course of which they stretched out into a magnificent, widely extended front, keeping their line with the regularity worthy of troops of dragoons, I succeeded in separating a fine bull upward of 18 feet in height from the rest of the herd and brought him to the ground within a short distance of the camp. The Bechuanas expressed themselves delighted at the success. They kindled a fire and slept beside the carcass, which they soon reduced to tongue and marrow bones. Mr. Cummings' first successful encounter with elephants was one of the most exciting of all. It is thus related. Having followed the spoor of a short distance, old Matuchito became extremely excited and told me that we were close to the elephants. 2 or 3 men quickly ascended the tallest trees that stood near us, but they could not see the elephants. Mutichio then extended men to the right and left while we continued on the spoor. In a few minutes, one of those who had gone off to the left came running, breathless, to say that he had seen the mighty game. I halted for a minute and instructed Isaac, who carried the big Dutch rifle, to act independently of me, while Kleinboy was to assist me in the chase. I bared my arms to the shoulder, and having imbibed a draught of aqua pura from the calabash of one of the spoors, I grasped my trusty 2-groove rifle and told my guide to go ahead. We proceeded silently as might be for a few hundred yards, following the guide when he suddenly pointed, exclaiming, "Clow!" and before us stood a herd of mighty bull elephants packed together beneath a shady grove about 150 yards in advance. I rode slowly towards them, and as soon as they observed me, they made a loud rumbling noise, and tossing their trunks, wheeled right about and made off in one direction, crashing through the forest and leaving a cloud of dust behind them. I was accompanied by a detachment of my dogs, who assisted me in the pursuit. The distance I had come and the difficulties I had undergone to behold these elephants rose fresh before me. I determined that on this occasion at least I would do my duty, and dashing my spurs into Sunday's ribs, I was very soon, much too close in their rear for safety. The elephants now made an inclination to my left, whereby I obtained a good view of the ivory. The herd consisted of 6 bulls. 4 of them were full-grown, first-rate elephants. The other 2 were fine fellows, but had not yet arrived at perfect stature. Of the 4 old fellows, who had much finer tusks than the rest, and for a few seconds I was undecided which of these 2 I would follow. Then, when suddenly the one which I fancied had the stoutest tusks broke from his comrades, and I at once felt convinced that he was the patriarch of the herd, and followed him accordingly. Catering alongside, I was about to fire when he instantly turned, and uttering a trumpet so strong and shrill that the earth seemed to vibrate beneath my feet, he charged furiously after me for several hundred yards in a direct line, not altering his course in the slightest degree for the trees of the forest, which he snapped and overthrew like reeds in his headlong career. When he pulled up in his charge, I likewise halted, and as he slowly turned to retreat, I let fly at his shoulder. Sunday, capturing and prancing and giving me much trouble, on receiving the ball, the elephant shrugged his shoulder and made off at a free, majestic walk. This shot brought several of the dogs to my assistance, which had been following the other elephants, and on their coming up and barking another headlong charge was the result, accompanied by the never-failing trumpet as before. In his charge, he passed close to me, when I saluted him with a second bullet in the shoulder, of which he did not take the slightest notice. I now determined not to fire again until I could make a steady shot. But although the elephant turned repeatedly, Sunday invariably disappointed me, capering so that it was impossible to fire. At length, exasperated, I became reckless of the danger, and springing from the saddle, approached the elephant under cover of a tree and gave him a bullet in the side of his head, when trumpeting so shrilly that the forest trembled. He charged among the dogs, from whom he seemed to fancy that the blow had come, after which he took up the position in a grove of thorns, with his head toward me. I walked up very near, and as he was in the act of charging, stood coolly in his path until he was within 15 paces of me, and let drive at the hollow of his forehead in the vain expectation that by doing so I should end his career. The shot only served to increase his fury, an effect which I had remarked shots in the head invariably did produce, and continuing his charge with incredible quickness and impetuosity, he all but terminated my elephant hunting forever. A large party of the Bechuanas who had come up yelled out simultaneously, imagining I was killed, for the elephant was at one moment almost on top of me. I, however, escaped by my activity and by dodging round bushy trees. The elephant held on through the forest at a sweeping pace, but he was hardly out of sight when I loaded and when I, he was hardly out of sight when I was loaded and in the saddle, and soon once more alongside. He kept crashing along at a steady pace, with blood streaming from his wounds. It was long before I again fired, for I was afraid to dismount, and Sunday was extremely troublesome. At length I fired sharp right at the left from the saddle. He got both balls behind the shoulder and made a long charge after me, rumbling and trumpeting as before. The whole body of the Bambonago men had now come up and were following a short distance behind me. Among these was Malion, who volunteered to help, and being a very swift and active fellow, he rendered me important service by holding my fidgety horse's head while I fired and loaded. I then fired 6 broadsides from the saddle, the elephant charging almost every time and pursuing us back into the main body of out the rear, who fled in all directions as he approached. The sun had now sunk behind the tops of the trees. It would very soon be dark, and the elephant did not seem very much distressed, notwithstanding all he had received. I recollected that my time was short, and therefore at once resolved to fire no more from the saddle, but to go close to him and fire on foot. Riding up to him, I dismounted, and approaching very near, I gave him right and left in the side of the head, upon which he made a long and determined charge after me. But I was now very reckless in his charges, for I saw that he could not overtake me, and in a twinkling I was loaded, and again approaching, fired sharp right and left behind the shoulder. Again he charged with a terrific trumpet, which sent Sunday flying through the forest. This was the last charge. The wounds which he had received began to tell on his constitution, and he now stood at bay beside a thorny tree, with the dogs barking around him. These, refreshed by the evening breeze, and perceiving that it was nearly over for the elephant, had once more come to my assistance. Having loaded, I drew near and fired right and left at his forehead. On receiving these shots, instead of charging, he tossed his trunk up and down, and by various sounds and motions most gratifying to the hungry natives, evinced that his demise was near. Again I loaded and fired my last shot behind his shoulder. On receiving it, he turned round the bushy tree beside which he stood, and I ran round to give the other barrel, but the mighty old monarch of the forest needed no more. Before I could clear the bushy tree, he fell heavily on his side, and his spirit had fled. Such is the specimen of the sport which the wilds of Africa offer to the ambitious hunter, that it is in some respects rather serious sport may be imagined from the description, as well as from Mr. Cummings' statement of his losses during the 4 expeditions into the interior. These were 45 horses and 70 herd of cattle, the value being at least $3,000. I also, he says, lost about 70 of my dogs, which would convey the idea of a considerable kennel. The dogs all told, but he usually had only about 30 at a time. Many were killed by lions, while elephants made way with still larger number.